One thing that defines each Pokémon is its type. Pokémon types are arguably the most important thing when it comes to Pokémon battles, and it's something that will always be a part of Pokémon. For the most part, you can tell what type of Pokémon is just by their design. Bulbasaur you can tell is grass type, by its green colour and the plant life growing on its back. Charmander is orange, and even has a flame on its tail, meaning it's definitely a fire type. And Squirtle is a blue aquatic reptile, meaning it's definitely a water type. However, I think we can all agree there's a good few Pokémon that you've looked at, and then looked at its typing and thought,
it just makes no f***ing sense. I mean, it's just bullshit.
So I've made a list of Pokémon that I'm going to talk about, having either questionable types, or types that, in my opinion, just don't match their designs. So let's begin by talking about Bulbasaur. What? Bulbasaur? One of the original starters?
Oh, hell no!
Now before any of you start calling me idiots, no, I'm not so stupid as to question why Bulbasaur is a grass type. Again, the massive green plant on its back makes that fairly obvious. But what I do question is why is Bulbasaur a poison type? I can kind of understand Ivysaur and Venusaur being poison type, since they have the pinkish looking plant blossoming on their back, but there isn't anything that really says poison type to me with Bulbasaur. But the main reason why I'm talking about Bulbasaur is because it's a starter Pokemon. Every starter Pokemon that gets a second type doesn't get that second type until it evolves at least once, except for Bulbasaur. I personally think starters shouldn't have a second type, only being grass, fire or water for the very first stage. I'm not saying starter Pokemon shouldn't have a second type. In fact, I prefer it if every starter at some point had a second type, but I personally think for the very first stage they should only be one type. I mean seriously, Bulbasaur is a poison type because... what, it learns poison powder? Is that it? Of course I see some possible arguments for Bulbasaur being a poison type, but I've never seen a good argument for Gyarados being a flying type. Literally every other flying type in the game makes sense that it's a flying type. They either have wings, or some sort of design that makes them look like a flying type, like being a balloon, or a fan. What does Gyarados have? It doesn't have wings, its design doesn't say anything about it being a flying type, it just seems to float off the ground. Is that why it's a flying type? But the Magnemite line also floats, and they're not flying type. They don't even have levitate. I mean, you're supposed to tell me that all these Pokemon are not flying type, and they don't have levitate, yet it's perfectly fine that Gyarados can fly. It can't even learn fly! Next we have a couple of psychic types, and a couple of non-psychic types. Hang on. Psyduck and Golduck aren't psychic type, and Execute and Executor are? Psyduck isn't a psychic type? I mean, apart from the name, Psyduck and Golduck make sense to be psychic types. Psyduck is constantly holding its head getting headaches, and Golduck has the jewel on its head, as well as the anime making out that Psyduck has psychic powers.
Misty, you know what happens when Psyduck gets a headache? That's it! Psychic power!
Psyduck and Golduck's Pokédex entries are even constantly talking about their psychic abilities. Execute and Executor have close to nothing that says psychic type. I mean, yeah, learn psychic moves, but so do Golduck and Psyduck. The only other hint towards a psychic type is a few mentions of telepathy in Execute and Executor's Pokédex entries, but looking at it, would anyone think that these two freaks of Pokémon are actually psychic types? I'd guess not. Next, let's take a look at the original 3 Ghost-type Pokémon, Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar. Now they're obviously Ghost-type, but like Bulbasaur, they're not so obviously Poison-type. In fact, their poison typing is the reason why everyone at first thought that ghosts were weak to psychic types. These ghosts at least look like they could be poison type, being purple, but it would have been so much more helpful if they just started out as pure ghost types. It also would have helped that in Gen 1, psychic types weren't completely immune to ghost types in the first place. Of course this mistake was fixed after Gen 1, but I personally do think that it would make more sense if the Ghastly line were either pure ghosts, or maybe Ghost Dark. Now I was originally going to go on a small rant on why Sudowoodo and Bonsly are rock type, and because they look like trees they should be grass types, but their Pokédex entries saved them. According to their Pokédex entries, their bodies are actually more similar to rock than vegetation, and they pretend to be trees to avoid being attacked, which makes sense when you attempt to cut them down in Gold and Silver. And since they hate water, it also makes sense why you use the squirt bottle to make Sudowoodo move. However, I'm still going to mention these two because, even though their dex entries do make sense of their rock typing, they still look like a tree. I mean, I'm willing to bet that close to every person who first saw Sudowoodo either thought it was a grass type, or at least not a rock type. Fast forwarding to the 6th generation, the brand new fairy type was introduced, and quite a few Pokemon had their types altered to be part fairy, and for the most part, the fairy typing made sense. like with Clefairy, Clefable, Jigglypuff, Togepi, Gardevoir, and Mawile, but not with Ordino or Chansey. Well, Mega Ordino of course is part Fairy, and I guess Chansey would have been pretty busted if it did get Fairy typing, but they look a lot more like fairies than, say, Gramble. A couple of other Pokemon that didn't receive the Fairy typing were Celebi and Jirachi. These two in my opinion look a lot more like fairies than, say, Cottony and Whimsicott, and Celebi is apparently based off an actual fairy, with Bulbapedia saying it's a green fairy-like creature, as well as one point apparently calling Celebi the Onion Fairy Pokemon? So it would have made sense if these two lost the Psychic type and gained the Fairy type instead. Well, Jirachi to me makes more sense of why it's a Psychic type. However, Celebi feels kinda like it fits the Fairy type more than the Psychic typing. However, both Celebi and Jirachi have been around way before the Fairy type existed, and have been Psychic types for a long time, meaning there was a super slim chance of either Celebi or Jirachi getting their typings changed in the first place. Speaking of the Fairy type, why is Klefki a Fairy type? What, those little pink parts make it a fairy? Come on, it's a floating pair of keys that jingle to threaten its opponents. Wouldn't it have made much more sense for a Pokemon with this design to be a ghost type instead of a fairy? You know, some sort of ghost possesses a set of keys that jingle to try and scare away its opponents. Like a ghost? The steel typing makes perfect sense since it's a pair of keys. But the fairy typing? To me it just makes close to no sense. Now of course the fairy typing wasn't the first new typing to ever be introduced in a Pokemon game. The second generation was the first generation to introduce new types. Speaking of Gold and Silver, let's take a look at the two cover legendaries. We have Ho-Oh, a Pokemon resembling a phoenix with a red and gold colour scheme, making good use of the fire flying type. And we have Lugia, considered to be Ho-Oh's polar opposite. And since Lugia is represented to be the guardian of the sea, and is shown many times to be alongside water, along with its white / silver and blue colour scheme, it makes absolute perfect sense that Lugia is a water flying type. Wait, that's not Lugia's typing. Wait, what? It is not water type. Lugia isn't a water type? No, it's not. It's still a flying type, right? Yeah, it's flying, but it's not water. Alright, then what is it? It's psychic. Psychic?! Lugia is a flying psychic?! That makes no sense! Almost every image with Lugia in it shows it alongside water. In the anime, Lugia is shown in water. In the games, each Pokédex entry mentions that Lugia pretty much lives in the ocean, being called the Guardian of the Sea, saying that it causes storms that last 40 days, or something else about the sea. In both Silver and Soul Silver, Lugia is literally shown swimming at the bottom of the ocean. Pretty much every game Lugia appears in, you find it in a water-based location, like the World Islands, Naval Rock, and this also includes non-main series Pokemon games like the Mystery Dungeon games, where you can find Lugia in the Silver Trench, or the Surrounded Sea, and the Pokemon Ranger games where you can find Lugia in the Undersea Cavern. Even the artwork for the trading card game make out Lugia to look like a water You've gotta be f***ing kidding me. This is hands down the most confusing Pokemon typing ever. Lugia's typing is so questionable it even confuses the frickin' TCG. Now there are some Lugia cards that are Psychic type, but if it isn't a water type in the game, why is it a water type in the TCG at all? But do you know what legendary is a water type in the game? Palkia. Wouldn't it have made so much more sense if Lugia had the water typing and Palkia had the Psychic typing? For one, Palkia's colour scheme and design looks much more like a Psychic type than a water type. In the Smash Bros games, Palkia distorts the stages, turning them upside down or reversing the screens, kinda like what a Psychic type would do. And it's the legendary that represents space. Dialga does represent time, but it actually looks like it's part steel. Plus, you know, some clocks could have metal casings. Well, its typing makes a lot more sense than Palkia's. If you took both Palkia and Lugia, put them together, and then told someone who's never seen these Pokemon before to ask which one is water type and which one is Psychic type, I'm willing to bet I know which types they'd guess. If this was a top 10 list of the top 10 most questionable Pokemon typings, these two would definitely be high on the list, with Lugia easily being number 1. Alright, let's wrap up this video with one last Pokemon. A Pokemon that's actually very special to this channel, mainly because it happens to be the channel's mascot. Let's take a look at Lucario. Does it make sense that it's a fighting type? Absolutely. Does it make sense that it's a steel type?
Yes.
The only steel looking thing it has are these metallic looking spikes on it. But apart from that, there really isn't anything else that says steel type. When it mega evolves, it gets more spikes, making it look a bit more like a steel type. But let's take an even closer look at Lucario. It's the Aura Pokémon. Each Pokédex entry for Lucario says it uses Aura. It can detect other people's aura, so much that Lucario can even detect auras from miles away, even to the point of knowing how someone's feeling. Kinda like a Jedi if you think about it. So in my opinion, it would have made a lot more sense if Lucario was Psychic type. Hell, it can even learn more Psychic moves than Steel moves, including Psychic and Zen Headbutt. But looking at Lucario, even though Psychic is probably the second type that makes the most sense, it doesn't really match its design amazingly well. So another possible second type could have been Dark, since Lucario, again, learns a good amount of Dark moves, including Dark Pulse and Crunch, and even looks kinda like a Dark type. It almost looks like Lucario has some sort of Black Zora mask going on there. But in the end, Lucario is stuck with the Steel typing, which on the positive side, is definitely not the most confusing typing, considering that Lucario does at least have something to make it look like a Steel type. Plus, it's definitely nowhere near as confusing as Lugia or Palkia.
So there you have it. Those are just a few Pokemon that have typings that to some people are quite confusing. There are of course some other Pokemon that I didn't talk about that I could have covered, but I didn't want the video to drag on for too long, so I might save them for another day. So if you want to be notified for more Pokemon videos, you can click subscribe, or even check out a past video, one of which I remind people of 10 Pokemon they might have forgotten about, or discussing which of Ash's Pokemon is his best one. A like is always appreciated if you enjoyed the video, but until next time, thanks so much for watching.